has been around education. And I know some of you in this room, as I don't know how many of you was in this room know about the research they call research on improving system of education. It's a global study that we are currently conducting in 10 countries in Asia, in Latin America, and in Africa. And what we are doing is, over the last 8 years, we have been looking at why is learning going down? Because statistics is showing that we have been able to get a lot of students to school, but we have not actually achieved that goals of making them to learn. And that is what actually we call learning crisis. So you that participated in the pre-workshop, I mean, you've learned a lot about that. So what we have been doing over the last 8 years is knowing what learning crisis is and the depths of learning crisis we have in different society, but also thinking about how to deal with it. So RISE will be coming, we'll be ending the program in September this year. And part of we have done this we've covered like around 16 million students globally in terms of looking at school records, performance of more than 16 million students. And what we've reached some certain conclusions in terms of what do we think we need to actually learn going forward. And so we are having this global kind of movement to really tell the stakeholders about what our findings are and what we think is the way forward for kittens. And that's actually what my presentation is all about. I will be talking about 3 facts and 5 acts to tackle learning crisis. I don't know, maybe you know there is a learning crisis in Nigeria. As part of our research, we've looked at and asked policymakers, school owners, everyone, to give us a definition of learning crisis and to tell us the extent to which they think this is. So give us a number. How much do you think, for example, in your school, people have this kind of skills that you consider as critical? And by the time we see what people are telling us and what data is telling us, everyone is underestimating what learning crisis is. And if we don't know the real extent of the problem, the first thing is we might not be able to solve the problem. So the first thing I want all of you to do for me in this room is this. I want you to take your pen and write something. I mean, we are talking about staying relevant. As educator, can you tell me one skill that you think in 20 years will remain relevant, that you can teach your kids, that you think in the next 20 years it should still be relevant? And not just relevant in the case of Nigeria. When you take those kids, for example, you're training a kid in Nigeria, he might find himself in Canada, in the US. Would that skill still be relevant anywhere the person finds himself?
Of information and the dynamic of information. Obsolescence of information is by 18 months. In fact, there was a time by the National Assembly, I advised that every certificate should carry an expiring date. Because of the currency of knowledge. The unknown future, the only skill you can give to your child to prepare them for unknown future is learnancy. Learning how to learn. Thank you.
Oh, that's great. Okay, so thank you so much. I think all what you've mentioned, I mean, social emotional skills, collaborations, and these very points, it's actually very relevant. But I want to show you what our research has shown in terms of the type of skills that is actually we find both across time, across ages, because I mean this study has actually covered both historical study of what has happened in all of the history of education in the countries we have worked in. And what he mentioned actually drew my attention. I mean, you call it learnancy. But what I will be talking about is foundational skills, which is the same thing as what he mentioned. So why is it very important that learning
teaching people what it requires for them to learn, which we call foundational skills. And what is foundational skills? 3 things: ability to read, ability to write, and ability to perform these basic arithmetics. In every school you go or everywhere you go, you think kids could do this. It's very simple. But sorry, go to the next slide. But when we see in terms of ability to competencies in these skills, so this is a name there from our studies. When we give kids ruler and pencil to tell us the height of that pencils, so it's easy when you make the scale 0, right? When you give them something of scale of 0 to 1, they can really tell you the height of that pen. When you change the scale, then they have to determine the height from this. Now, when the scale is 0, the same question, the same thing, 80% of the kids, they get that right. When you change the scale, the number drops to 40%. If we convert that to Nigeria, we'll be getting around 20% in terms of similar ability to get this right. So they know this thing, which means it's not that the school is not teaching them to measure the height. So they know how the height works. But when it comes to apply out of that convenient zones, they are unable to do it. So what I'm telling you this morning is the importance of foundational skills. And our research is trying to shed light on why you need it and why, as education stakeholders in this room, you can be part of this drive. We talk about learning crisis. We talk about future of work. We talk about remaining relevance. All of this, we can only achieve it if we actually encourage and orientate our education system to prioritize what is right. And what is right is about these foundational skills. Next slide, please. So the first fact is that foundational learning is an essential first step towards achieving many developmental goals. Next slide. So like you said, I said all the points you mentioned were key. So if you look at all education system, this is like what you want to achieve, right? Empowerment, citizen education, digital skills, environmental education, employability, and the rest. But this is like building a skyscraper, right? If you look at what is the foundation of that skyscraper, which is the most important element, is the foundational skill. And when you have the ability, I used to give this example when I was learning how to drive. My instructors was like, okay, don't drive at night and don't drive in the rain because those are the 2 major danger spots for a new driver. But I have never seen anybody that when you want to teach someone to drive, you don't teach them driving at night, rather inside the rain. You teach them in a place whereby they don't actually have to encounter these issues. But at the end of the day, they needed to encounter these issues. So what was the purpose of that? He is trying to tell me that once I give you the foundation, you will always know your way once you follow and grow and develop and build upon that foundation. And that's what education needs to be. We need to actually target foundations. Next slide. So I will actually be rushing through this slide. Why? Because it's actually a long slide. It's a long slide because this is something, a pack we develop for all the countries. And we are using this as part of disseminating this research. So this slide is around 40 pages and I don't think I have that time. So, but what are the kind of areas? So what I want to be showing you briefly is what are the kind of areas that foundational skills has been proven to empower people. So health and empowerment. These are kind of research, again, that has been conducted in various countries. And again, we see ability to have these foundational skills has been critical to issues like reduction in fertility, in terms of child mortality issue. Generally, it empowers women to do and take better decisions. It empowers children to have that driver's license to drive everywhere, such that if they find themselves in the US tomorrow, they become still relevant. If they find themselves in China, they will remain relevant because let's be honest with ourselves. Can we really train anybody for future? because we don't even know the future. In the next 20 years, nobody knows the job that will be out there. We talked today about AI, we talked about robotics. I don't even know, maybe I would be able, I mean, I'm a researcher, but if AI can do a better research than I do, so what will be my job then? So, but the question is, if you have these foundational skills, which means ability to adapt to whatever situation, that's what we need. Ability to such that if you find yourself, I mean, why do we have so much unemployment problem in this country? You train someone, he could not get a job in that skills, and is 20 years saying, I'm unemployed. But if we have actually trained people, not just for the market, say, oh, you will become an accountant, but when you get to the field, when you go out there, you ask yourself, I mean, there is no place where I can apply these skills. Is there where I can adapt and with the flexible skills that I've taken to apply whatever I know to different concepts, to different circumstances? That's actually what we need. And that's how we can train kids for the future. So, again, someone mentioned socio-emotional skills. And what our research has also shown is foundational skills is also key to developing that. Next slide. Yeah, so here we'll look at also, I mean, when we talk about, and this is something I've done a lot of time, when you ask parents, what do they want their kids to be in future? It's always to be a doctor, to make sure they complete the university and the rest. And then the question is, nobody actually has a goal of having foundational skills. Let's be sincere. Nobody, I mean, someone will say, maybe you're setting the bar too low. But the problem is, if we have the right foundation, it's not like the bar. It's anybody can move everywhere. And people can move into different space. And again, this is what this research is showing, that performance in secondary and tertiary education, one of the main driver is foundational skill. Next slide. So again, when we also look the same study, I mean, when we do studies around labor market, economic growth, and we have actually tested this. What we were doing there is to look at the number of years people spent in school and the actual skills that people actually learn from school. When you see which one is the higher predictor of labor market robustness or of economic growth performance of a country, you find that again is that learning that matters rather than being in school. So my last point to educators in this room is to ask ourselves the question, what are the kind of things that we do to promote foundational skills? And what are the kind of things we do that impede foundational skills? Let me tell you one of the things we find as impediment to building foundational skills is certification. Why certification? I think some people in this room will know this example. Someone gave the example recently in one of our discussions, and he said, "Okay, if your AC is spoiled, right? You just ask someone to just fix it, right? And if the person do well, you pay him the money and say this guy is good. But when you get to your office, if your AC is spoiled, what will you do? Or you want to employ someone that will be repairing AC, what will you do? You look for someone with certificates that can say, oh, I'm an engineer, I'm qualified. And you won't remember this guy that just fixed your, maybe. So in a way, we've put this huge weight on certification, and the end product is what we are saying. Everybody wants to pass. I've said this to policymakers most times. When you look at, when you tell them we are having learning crisis, the first thing they will tell you is, oh, my state is number 12 on WAEC. Oh, my state is number 1. So I said, oh, this is good. But so the first thing is, I mentioned, do you know this WAEC is what is called high-stake exams? You say, oh, what is take an example. You know, in WAEC, you must pass because it determines your future. So if something determines your future, so what do you think happens? Schools must make sure you pass. I mean, all sorts of things. I mean, you must do whatever it takes to pass this exam. So if it is high stake, then it doesn't tell you the true crisis level. So you first of all need an assessment an assessment that can tell you something that kids are not thinking about passing, but they are really giving you the obvious assessment of their learning. And they are passing this information. So it is the ability of your system to really abstract from kids those kind of assessment that tells you where they are rather than where you think they are. That is critical. So we need to develop a post-certification culture. I'm not saying stop issuing certificate. I'm saying we need, as education stakeholders, to prioritize learning. It has to be the foundation. So next slide. Yeah, so here we are showing the data again, showing us that the bad thing is learning is actually going down in sub-Saharan Africa. And when I've done this data for Nigeria, it's also going down. And the obvious thing is when this data was collected, it was collected just before COVID in 2020. So the question is, COVID now strike. Learning is going down and COVID now strike. Just imagine what that implication is. What's the implication of this to education stakeholders is we are living in a crisis situation. And what our advice is, we want you to be part of this movement to tell the story about learning crisis, but more importantly, to tell the story about how can we address it. And I think I don't want to take you through all the slides. This slide here is about what I mentioned earlier. So you see, this is what people are predicting. When you ask people to predict the extent of learning crisis in their country, you can see a lot of people are predicting, oh, it's good. These are people that are predicting that, oh, it's not as good as we think. And you see that majority of the countries, 80%, they are over predicting the performance rate in their country. So I want you to leave this place, this exposure conference, knowing that even though in a pocket of schools, I always say this, every schools have their own Harvard. If you go to any state, you see these very elitists, school doing very well. But those are just the exception. I don't know, maybe you know that. Those are just exception. If you see the crisis in our society, the reality is majority are not actually beneficiaries of that system. And irrespective of where you are, maybe in a very good school, in a very good office, I'm suggesting what can you do to make it better. And that's how we have been part of exposure conference and partnering with Dr. Stella. Why? Because we think collaboration is key. So I want us to leave this room knowing that as an institution, we are interested in partnership that can actually pass this message to as much people that are needed to hear it. That we are living in crisis, but the good thing is there's a lot of system. Thank you for actually showing this slide. This is actually one system. This is Brazil, this is Peru, this is Vietnam. This country, 50 years ago, they are having the same kind of crisis that we talked about. Now, they are reorientating their system. They have actually gotten it right in many instances. They are doing better. Why? One of the 2 things or 3 things that I want to highlight that they did right. Number 1 is to understand assessment and to do assessment better. What do I mean to understand assessment? To know what assessment matters and what assessment doesn't matter. Don't look at WAEC where you want to see what is going on. And because I'm speaking to a lot of school owners here, one of the major, most important assessment is the assessment you take care in classrooms. So you need to design it to evaluate, to diagnose problems, rather than also to signal or to align it with, okay, if you can pass this, you will pass WAEC. No. let's make it more aligned towards diagnostics to know that, oh, these are the problems my kids are having, and these are things we need to do. That's the one thing I think we need to actually do in addressing the challenges. Another thing we need to do as stakeholders is let's look around ourselves. How do we encourage people to demystify some problems like certification I mentioned? But more importantly, we need to imbue the idea of what we call learning trajectory in our work. So what we call learning trajectory is that don't just learn the problem, learn the dynamics. What I mean by that is these kids, you know that there's the problem. Look at them, track them over time, which means don't just test once and leave it like that. You need to integrate all the assessment system such that we can do better in knowing just where we are not just going to know what the problem is, but we know where the problem is and we know whether we are solving it. So those are the kind of things, idea we need to do. Another point I want to highlight here is the issue of alignment. And this will be my last point. When I talk about education misalignment, so there are three levels, or 4 levels. So we have curriculum, we have assessment, we have classroom practices, which is what kids get to learn. And in one of our studies, we are actually also doing that study in Nigeria. What we did was to bring in people from the curriculum bodies to tell us about when you are designing the curriculum, what was your idea? And what you find out is when people design curriculum, they want people to actually make exploration, not just learn the idea, but to be able to use it elsewhere. But what you find when we look at teachers, most of what teaching practice is about just to get the idea. And so, for example, kids know 1 to 1,000. And you see your parents saying, oh, my kids can read 1 to 1,000 or 10,000. Great. But when you ask them how many dogs are outside the room, they don't actually, I'm talking about very early. If they can convert that issue of ability to, that all those things 1 to 1 million is just the ability to count. They've actually not learned anything. So it's about understanding those misalignments. And so what we have done is we have looked at misalignment between curriculum and assessment, between assessment and classroom practices. And what solid advice that we keep having from there is, as school owners, as teachers, we need to actually look at and understand misalignment better. Because, for example, most of what we teach in classrooms, and I'm not just talking about poor school, public school, I'm even talking about very top private schools. If you see in one of the slides, what we try to do is to look at, even in the most, high-performing schools in most of these developing countries, you still see that they are less than what is expected. And why do we have this? Because we have not actually understand why the misalignment are. What is our curriculum? I think this is the question we need to ask ourselves. What is he asking us to teach these kids? What is our assessment? What are we using our assessment for? And I'm not just saying WAEC, classroom assessment. How do we design it in order to ensure that we are not just having them to say, okay, read 1 to 10, like in the example I said, but we are saying, can they apply that numbering into something else so that every day, every time, they are aware from the foundation that what we are teaching them is not something to know or to impress their colleague, but to make a change in the society. That's all I want to actually share with you. It's actually a lot, but there is no time. So what we'll do, we have a stand there. We have some gifts for, I don't know how much this can take, but just visit our stand. If you want to know more, please you can contact Dr. Stella about, we are having this global campaign that would be taking place in more than 10 countries starting in September. And people would, various people that you know very well will be leading that campaign in Nigeria. So we just want you to also add your voice when you see it. Even you don't need to see it. With what I've discussed this morning, to add your message and your voice to this debate around how can we address learning crisis. So thank you so much.
My concern is, you have emphasized assessment, and I think so too, that's one of the areas of challenge, because even if schools are doing quite a lot, and then you have teachers, of course, even there is a foundational problem, even with the teacher training, which you had identified there. A lot of people that become teachers don't really like to become teachers because of the way we look at teaching profession in Nigeria. But okay, as a school leader or as a teacher in the class, I've listened to you. I'm concerned. I want to do something. What exactly can I start with if I'm looking at the area of assessment? How do I begin to tweak or adjust my assessment procedure? What do I need to add or take away to make it relevant so that there won't be that misalignment? Thank you.
So, as a teacher, one of the, okay, let me first say it. So, RISE project is system. So, most of our discussion is with policymakers. So, we discuss a lot with policymakers, and some of our work has actually addressed them. But as a teacher, we also have our tools, and that's actually why the work we are doing with what we call survey of enacted curriculum is critical. So if you have, if I'm to teach this concept, right? One of the things we find in textbooks in Nigerian system is, do you use examples from the textbook or use the examples from this kid's immediate environment? So someone that doesn't know it could be a very popular thing when someone sits down and writing these textbooks, he has a lot of these examples, but you know your kids better. Do you convert this to what they know? But as a teacher, I think one of the message I have for you or for them is whatever you are teaching. One of the misconceptions about our school system is this. We believe exploration should take place in the university. So that's why we say, oh, he's a doctor, and now he wrote a thesis where he's applying. But even at pre-nursery, we're actually teaching to apply. I don't know, maybe you get, every learning is to apply. And whatever you teach that you don't see application or doesn't lead to application, there's a problem and there's a misalignment. So I think the necessary tool is when you do this and you design assessment, you need to know, it's not just that they know how to do numbers. Let me give you an example. When kids, when you ask them 8 plus 7, and this is actually what studies show. When you ask them 8 plus 7 and you write it in the format they have been seeing in school, they know the answers. But when you do this long format, they miss it. Why? So, for example, if you say 81 plus 87, straight like this, they don't know how to do it. But when you put it like this, they know how to do it. That means they don't know the concepts of what you are trying to apply. So what we need to do is ability to actually train teachers to know that the purpose of everything in the classroom. And I've looked at the curriculum, not just Nigeria, of many curriculum. Every curriculum is actually trying to build that. The question is, do we at school level, at classroom level, ensure that we achieve that objective? That's the key point I would suggest.
Okay, thank you very much. That was a wonderful presentation. I'm always worried. You see, I don't know, we've been talking about learning crisis. There's no way we're not going to have crisis. I will continue to have crisis until we're able to get it right. I'll just share this with you. You just imagine somebody on top of Okada and pull out his cell phone and call his barber. Barb my hair. When I come, I'll pay you. Where is the head? Where is the barber? How can you barb somebody's head in his absence? That's exactly what we're doing to education. How can you design curriculum without understanding the brain you are designing it for? How can you design assessment without understanding the brain you are designing it for? Learning is a process that is carried out by the brain. I've asked this question over and over again. If you look at the SDG 4, there is no provision for neuroscience of learning and teaching. We keep going around the cycle. Like the assessment method Mommy Bankole mentioned, is a very simple thing. Some of us will have experienced this. You see a student who contributes so much to class discussion. When it comes to writing exam, he fails. And you adjudge that student as having failed. That is indeed criminal offense. We cannot begin to design curriculum without understanding the process by which brain learn. What about mental development stages? What about social emotional intelligence? What about the environment of where the student learn? What about the cell states, the physical states of the brain? Because the brain is involved. When our sister was talking about Dubai, it's all a product about brain, frontal brain activities, purely imagination. What is imagination? Compound word, image formation. That is the best way the frontal lobe of the brain works, is through imagination. And let me tell you, schools are boring, no matter how highly elitist your school is. Until you begin to accommodate the brain in the classroom, you are frustrating these children. And let me also mention this. Exam is wicked. If I have my way, I'll cancel NECO and WAEC. It has destroyed a lot of destiny. What does a lawyer need maths to do? And 7, 8, 9 years, they are struggling to pass the exams. How do we apply multiple intelligences in teaching and learning? What about differentiated insurance studies? Because when you are teaching a class of 20 students, you are teaching 20 classes. What about unique nature of each child? The Fadry model system is a failure in the 21st century. And we must begin to think how to innovate instructional strategy. Thank you.